The cartographer's erasure. They said Genevieve Croft never existed. But they forgot to erase the map she left behind. The official story was a masterclass in bureaucratic neatness, a clean, sterile document that explained everything and said nothing at all. It claimed Genevieve Croft, a name that now felt like a ghost on Arthur Penwright's tongue, had simply packed up and left. A voluntary departure. No forwarding address, no concerned family, no loose ends. The file was closed before it was ever truly opened. But Arthur, a man who had spent 40 years curating the dusty, tangible past in the city's central archive, knew the texture of a lie. It was too smooth, too perfect. Real life, like the brittle pages of a 17th century ledger, was full of imperfections, smudges, and frayed edges. This story had none. He sat in the hushed quiet of his small apartment. The city of Viridian's ambient hum a distant counterpoint to the frantic beating in his chest. He had been Genevieve's mentor, the old man who had seen the fire of genius in her eyes when she first walked into his archive as a university student. She didn't just see maps as directions. She saw them as stories, as layered histories of human ambition and folly. She could read a city's soul in its forgotten alleyways and rerouted streets. And now, the city had swallowed her whole. Her apartment, when he'd finally convinced a reluctant building manager to let him in, was the most terrifying place he had ever seen. It wasn't messy or ransacked. It was empty. Not just empty of furniture, but empty of life. The walls were freshly painted a bland, anonymous beige. The scuff marks on the floor where her drafting table used to be were gone. The faint scent of jasmine tea that always clung to her living room had been replaced by the sharp, chemical smell of industrial cleaner. They hadn't just removed her belongings. They had scrubbed away the very impression of her existence. Her digital footprint had vanished just as completely. Social media profiles, university records, bank accounts, even her library card registration, all gone. It was a professional erasure, so thorough it felt like a violation of reality itself. For a week, Arthur was adrift in a sea of digital ghosts and official denials. He was just an old archivist. What could he do? The police had politely dismissed him as a sentimental old man. But they had made one mistake. They were digital natives, creatures of the cloud and the server. They had forgotten that Genevieve, like him, loved the physical world. Tucked inside a hollowed-out copy of Ptolemy's Geographia on his own bookshelf, a book he had lent her months ago, was the one thing they had missed. It was a map, but like none he had ever seen. It was printed on a strange, vellum-like paper that felt both ancient and synthetic. It depicted Viridian City, but overlaid with a complex latticework of what looked like celestial charts and alchemical symbols. The streets were there, but they were connected by lines of faint, glowing ink that corresponded to no known subway or utility lines. Certain buildings, insignificant modern glass boxes and forgotten pre-war brownstones, were marked with symbols that made the hair on his arms stand up. It was Genevieve's work. He knew it from the precise, elegant calligraphy of the labels. It was her last message, a map not of a place, but of a secret that had gotten her erased. He spread the map out under the warm glow of his desk lamp, the silence of the room pressing in. The official story was a lie. This map, this beautiful, terrifying map, was the only truth he had left, and it was a truth he would follow into whatever darkness had taken her. His first move was a retreat into his own domain, the archive. For 2 days, Arthur didn't sleep. He cross-referenced. He pulled ancient city plans, some so fragile they threatened to turn to dust in his hands, and laid them alongside Genevieve's impossible chart. He scanned forgotten architectural digests from the city's boom years, and pored over the minutes of defunct zoning committees. He was a man hunting a ghost with paper and ink. The symbols on her map were the key. They weren't random. They had a maddening, internal logic. One, a stylized serpent eating its own tail, appeared over buildings constructed by a single, long-bankrupt firm in the 1920s. Another, a complex knot of intersecting lines, marked locations that were all, at one point, sites of unexplained geological anomalies, dismissed in old newspapers as minor tremors. He was building a new kind of lexicon, a dictionary for a language no one else knew was being spoken. He chose his first target carefully, a small, unassuming brick building in the old mercantile district, marked on Genevieve's map with the symbol of a broken compass. Officially, it was the headquarters of a defunct import-export company, shuttered for decades. To any passerby, it was just another boarded-up relic. Arthur went at dusk, when the city's sharp edges softened into shades of gray and indigo. He felt a tremor of fear, a sensation alien to his quiet, ordered life. He was an archivist, a keeper of the past, not an adventurer. But the memory of Genevieve's empty apartment was a spur, driving him forward. The building was silent, a brick tomb. The windows were opaque with grime, the main door chained and padlocked. He circled it, his gloved hand tracing the cold, rough brickwork. And then he found it. On the rear wall, almost hidden by a rusted drainpipe, was a small bronze plaque no bigger than his palm. It was so tarnished it was nearly invisible against the dark brick. On it, etched with incredible precision, was the symbol of the broken compass. It wasn't a recent addition. The patina of age was deep and authentic. It had been there for years, hiding in plain sight. As his fingers touched the cold metal, a strange sensation prickled his skin, a low, almost subaudible hum that seemed to emanate from the very stones of the building. It wasn't just a building, it was a node, a point of connection in the secret network Genevieve had uncovered. He felt a sudden, chilling certainty that he was no longer alone. It wasn't a sound or a sight, but a shift in the atmosphere, the feeling of being observed by an unseen intelligence. He pulled his hand back and stepped away, his heart hammering against his ribs. He glanced down the empty alley, seeing only shadows. But the feeling persisted. They knew. The people who had erased Genevieve now knew someone was looking at her map. The hunt was no longer one-sided. Panic was a cold, sharp thing, a shard of ice in Arthur's lungs. He stumbled back from the alley, melting into the river of anonymous faces on the sidewalk, his mind racing faster than it had in decades. They knew. That hum, that pressure in the air, it was the system detecting an anomaly. Him. He was a bug in their pristine, hidden code. For a terrifying moment, he considered running, disappearing like Genevieve. But where would an old man who smelled of paper and dust run to? His entire life was contained within a 10-block radius of the archive. The thought was a sudden, clarifying shock. He couldn't outrun them in their world of shadows and whispers. He had to drag them into his. The archive wasn't just his sanctuary, it was his weapon. The next morning, he walked through its grand stone entrance not as a frightened old man, but as a warrior returning to his fortress. He bypassed his usual duties, heading straight for the acquisitions department with a grim sense of purpose. He spent hours executing his countermove, a strategy born of a lifetime spent organizing the chaos of human history. He wasn't leaking a story to a discredited press or a fleeting blog post. He was making the conspiracy a permanent, undeniable, and excruciatingly boring part of the public record. He scanned Genevieve's map at the highest possible resolution. He wrote a detailed, dispassionate monograph detailing his findings, the corresponding symbols, the defunct companies, the geological oddities. He documented Genevieve's existence and disappearance, citing her university records from the physical microfiche he had unearthed, a format they had clearly overlooked. He bundled it all together, stamped it, and gave it an official mind-numbing accession number, VCA 77B-113. He filed it under Urban Development Survey's 20th Century Unsolicited Materials. He buried their world-shattering secret in a plain gray archival box, placing it on a shelf between a report on sewer line replacements from 1958 and a proposal for a new public park that was never built. It was a masterstroke of bureaucratic warfare. To erase it now would require a physical break-in, a theft that would trigger alarms and investigations, creating the very noise they sought to avoid. He then made a single, high-quality physical copy and mailed it to a trusted colleague at a national museum, a woman with an ironclad reputation, with a simple note, "If you don't hear from me in a month, open this and make it public." The feeling of being watched vanished. The silence that followed was heavy, a held breath. A week later, a call came. An anonymous tip. A young woman, disoriented but physically unharmed, had been found near the old freight yards. Arthur drove to the city hospital, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. And there she was. Genevieve. She was thinner, her eyes holding a haunted, distant look, but it was her. She saw him standing in the doorway, and the fog in her gaze cleared for just a moment. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. She couldn't speak of where she had been. The memories seemingly wiped clean, but she was alive. As he sat by her bedside, the city lights of Viridian beginning to twinkle outside, he knew they had won. They hadn't destroyed the monster, but they had dragged it into the light, pinning it down with the mundane, inescapable weight of a library card. They had tried to erase a story, but Arthur Penwright, the city's quiet keeper of tales, had simply given it a new, permanent binding.